Thank you for joining me today. My name is Kate Langan, and I am the engagement librarian at Western Michigan University Libraries. I work in Waldo Library up on the third floor, so if you're ever around, stop by room 3015 to say hi. If the door's open, come on in. I'm in the back of that room. I have been a professor at Western since 2009, and my role here at the University Libraries is to promote workshops and promote tools, resources, and services for students, faculty, and staff, services and from the university libraries, how we can help you succeed in your time here, your academic career here at the university. So today we're going to be talking about developing your scholarly identity at a research university. So this is a really it's more of a, not a philosophical question, but it's more of a big picture question. It's really trying to figure out what your role is here at the university as a student. So it's really, today we're going to be talking about the different types of universities or academic institutions across the country and how the type of academic institution shapes your scholarly identity. And then also we'll be talking about how the libraries can help you succeed and grow your scholarly identity at a research university. So the first thing I wanted to ask is if you could, there's a poll here, and it's an anonymous poll. I'm just curious to see if you happen to know what kind of school Western Michigan University is. So I've given you a selection of 10 options, the last one being, what does any of this even mean? So let me walk through a few of these. So some types of institutions that higher education institutions could be a private college, it could be a four-year college, it could be a master's granting university, it could be a doctoral granting university, it could be a Research 1 university, and I'm going to get all into these in a little bit, Research 2 university, or it could be a public university, and then it could be a huge combination or variation of any of these. For example, it could be a doctoral granting public Research 2 university. And if none of that makes sense, the final option is what? So based on those options there, what do you think Western Michigan University, what kind of school is Western Michigan University? And just think about that for just a second. You can click on the answer if you want, or just, have it in your mind. And the reason why I bring up these different types of schools is because I don't want to say the type of school dictates your role as a student, but it does define a certain level or certain expectation for the community. It's a microcosm, right? So each type of institution has its own culture and expectations. So these here, up in here, the poll, the types of IOHEs, and I'm going to highlight it here on my screen. These are called different types of institutions of higher education, and that's an abbreviation as IOHE. So that's something that you might run across your time here at Western. So institutions are categorized into all these different variations. The first big variation is that it's a degree granting classification. So one of the classifications is what's the highest degree that school offers. So some of the terminal degrees that schools can offer could be an associate's degree, it could be a bachelor's degree, it could be a master's degree, or a doctoral degree. So Western has doctoral or PhD programs, so we are considered a doctoral program. We're considered a doctoral granting university. Whereas a bachelor's degree might be something like K College, right? So they don't offer graduate school or graduate level degrees. An associate's degree would be something similar, or you might be familiar with 2-year degrees, like something, or certificates that you get at community colleges, such as KVCC. Oh, hi, yes, Tracy, here you go. Thank you. Sorry, and then hi to who just joined me. So just jump on in. My name's Kate. I'm just gonna reintroduce myself really quickly. This session is being recorded, but you guys will be, it is anonymized, so all the names and images won't be shared on the recording. And I do have the chat box open, so if you have a question, you can either put it in the chat box or you can unmute yourself and just ask, just interrupt me. I'm absolutely fine with that. So, and yeah, so we're just getting started. So right now we're just talking about different types of academic institutions. And we're talking about academic institutions because we're talking about how an academic institution shapes the expectations and the experience for students and the community, for the faculty and for this, for the academic community. So right now we're just going through the IOHE's Institution of Higher Education from this guide. So everything I'm sharing right now is on this guide here. So we just talked about one way that we classify schools is by the terminal degree. Another way we talk about types of higher education is FTE. I know this, you guys might be like, whoa, this is way more detailed than I was expecting, but it really does shape how the culture or the financial or the economic structure of the university. So full-time enrollment plays into how a university is classified. So, like a university could be like, we're just under 20,000 undergraduate full-time students, whereas somewhere like U of M might be somewhere in the mid-40s, for example. Another way we think about institutions of higher education and which shapes the microcosm or the academic community or the culture is the funding. So for example, are we a publicly funded institution or are we a privately funded institution? Publicly funded, University of Michigan, Michigan State, Western Michigan. Privately funded, Kalamazoo College, Albion College, Hope College, right? So those cultures are defined by how, is it public monies, is it private monies, and for example. Finally, another very important part of talking about how we classify academic institutions is faculty output. What do faculty do besides teach? They do research, or they write grants to do research. And the output of those faculty members, so how many publications, books, articles, grants, money that they bring in from grants, those all play into the classification. So when we put it all together, if I scroll back up here, I showed you Research 1 University, Research 2 University. A Research 1 University is a highly, highly productive academic research university. So something like University of Michigan is a highly productive R1 university. Western Michigan is a highly productive academic university, but a little less so than something like compared to University of Michigan. Another term you might hear is SLAC, Small Liberal Arts College. So a SLAC is something like K College, Albion, Hope. And then again, associates or 2-year degree, KVCC. So as we go through and think about you as a student, and I haven't asked you guys yet, but if you're willing to share in the chat, I would love to know what degree you're in, what major you're in, like how long you've been at Western. I would love to know who you are at, what is your student identity? What is your connection to Western? For example, I've been here since 2009. I'm a faculty member, I'm a professor, and I work in the university libraries. So my area of expertise is research and engagement. So feel free to share your identity. I would love to know your major, your degree, or how long you've been here. Because that's the very beginning of your scholarly identity, right? It doesn't stop just with your major. There's so much more involved in a scholarly identity. And we're going to get into that in just a second. So as I scroll up, so if we think about it, I'm going to put this here in the chat. Oh, hi, Mohabin. Thank you. Oh, Shivi, thank you. PhD in geosciences, 5th year, graduating this semester. Excellent, congratulations. That's quite the feat. And we're gonna talk about that in a little bit because we're gonna be talking about the product. We just talked about faculty productivity, but we're also going to talk about student productivity. And for a PhD student, that means the big fat dissertation, right? So we're going to be talking about that. 3rd year PhD as well in Department of Chemistry. Okay, excellent. Oh, nanomaterials. Oh, all of you are PhD. Well, okay. So as we go through, if you guys have specific questions related to what it means to be a doctoral student and your scholarly identity or your academic identity, we can take the time to tailor it to what it means to be a PhD student, because that is a whole different can of worms. Oh, and yeah, so 1st year Masters of Library Science. Excellent. Okay, thank you, Tracy. So we all have graduate students. So I was actually expecting undergrads, but I kind of understand why a graduate student would want to take this workshop. So, and since I do have you all here, can you just give me a thumbs up or thumbs down when we're talking about institutions of higher education and all these R1s and R2s? Are these terms that you have heard before and understood? Or are these new terms to you? If you could put in the chat, new, thumbs up, you've heard them before. Okay. Thumbs up. Okay, heard them before. Okay, great. So Western is, right, we are a research to publicly funded, or sometimes you might hear land grant. We're a land grant institution. And there are 132 universities that meet this classification, for example, just to compare to how that might play out in different institutions. And for those of you who are going finishing your PhD, which is pretty much all of you, if you're thinking about moving into academia for a position and to do research or to be a professor, you will want to know these terms when you're going on the job market, because not only will they dictate what's expected of you, but they'll dictate a lot of what is expected of you and the culture that you are expected to bring for students in research. So if you're applying to an R1 university, you're going to have to up your game on that scholarly output. R2, still rigorous, but a little less so. Yeah, I think someone's unmuted, so I'm just going to ask if anyone could double check to see that they're muted. I'm going to try to... Hold on just a second. I'm going to pause for just a second. There we go. There we go. I think I got everybody. Excellent. Okay. So what does this mean to be a student at a research university? And I think I might spin this a little to talk about graduate level research. So when you applied as a student, whether it's undergrad or graduate, you were applied for the job of student, right? So at the graduate level, your application was being reviewed based on your abilities and knowledge and skills that you acquired, not in high school, but in undergraduate, to show that you would be ready for a research university. So your portfolio, when you applied, was really proving to the department that you applied to and to the graduate college at Western that you had the skill set to contribute to the scholarly conversation, right? So that you were ready to engage in research and scholarly communication at a very specific level. So graduate level versus undergraduate, two very different benchmarks for contribution. To be a student at a research university at the undergraduate level, when one of your objectives is to learn how to organize and share your thoughts and ideas, right? So you go through the first 4 years of your education, analyzing, understanding, listening, and then compiling ideas to share out. That is the scholarly identity of a student in a nutshell. There is a very specific role in participating in that scholarly conversation. Then when you jump from undergraduate to graduate level, that level of expertise bumps up just a little. So some of you, I'm not familiar with some of the PhD programs here at Western with the STEM programs, but sometimes you don't go through that master's program. You go straight from undergrad into the PhD program. In my PhD program, I had to do the master's first, and then I jumped into the PhD program. So it was a little different. So little by little, I was able to develop my scholarly identity and develop my level of expertise. Undergraduate, it's more broad-based. You're learning the basics of the discipline. Master's level, you're learning more detail, more broad, more in-depth information about the discipline. PhD level, you become the expert, right? That is the hope is that when they hood you at the hooding ceremony for your doctoral program, that you have now become the expert. So your scholarly identity, as you move through all of those levels, goes from generalist into specialist. And that's just the content area. But what does that mean with this scholarly communication? Or another way I like to talk about it is scholarly. Oh, wait, I just blanked on what I was going to say. Scholarly conversation. Students have a role in that conversation. I think that's something that's often overlooked and often undervalued in the students themselves. I don't think students realize that this entire microcosm at the academic institution is highly dependent on students participating in that conversation. So that means shaping your ideas and shaping the way that you push out that information in your discipline. So again, I apologize. This presentation, I really wrote it with an undergraduate in mind, but I'm really excited that I have so many graduate students in this, because it is a very different perspective, having gone through it myself. So in undergrad, the way we're training students to develop that scholarly identity, right? We're training students how to write their papers. We're training students how to give a presentation, and we're training students how to interact in the academic institution. And there are multiple ways that interaction can happen, that scholarly conversation can happen. It's not necessarily just in papers or presentations, but it's the entire culture, right? So I'm going to scroll down here. Here's another poll. I mean, this is how we contribute to the scholarly conversation, or the conversation of scholarship, right? We participate by attending classes. We participate by just completing our assignments. We participate by giving presentations, writing research papers, by attending non-required or optional workshops or events like this, a lecture or a workshop. And maybe you're going to go listen to a speaker just to build on to listen and hear and learn at school. You participate in scholarly conversations when you're hanging out with your friends and family. And if you're talking about school, that is participating in the scholarly conversation, whether you realize it or not. It does become all-encompassing. And then even if you are leaving academia, you are still continuing the conversation of scholarship in your profession, whether or not it's at a university or college. If you go out into work for a government, NGO, if you go work for a think tank or for a public school or a bank, you are still taking that scholarly conversation with you, because it's not like it ends when you finish your degree. You take all that expertise and knowledge with you into the workforce. So, and there's so much more. One thing I was reading, going to office hours to meet with your professor, that is participating in the scholarly conversation. It just happens everywhere. I don't know if you guys can think of other ways. I I feel like I had a pretty good list, and I was only limited to 10 on my list. But if you can think of other ways that you, I guess even social media, right? Like that's a great way. There's so much happening on social media about, or reading the newspapers, or even commenting on a news article online. Going to conferences, perfect. Yes, of course, going to conferences, that's a great way of participating. So it really is pretty much everything we do as a student on campus and beyond. It is our entire being. And then when you leave, I'm really curious if you guys wouldn't mind sharing. For those of you who are getting your PhD, do you plan on working in academia? Is your goal to teach at the university or do research for a university or college? Or are you hoping to do something out like in the private sector or government sector? I'm just curious. Academia, excellent. Yeah, academia, excellent. Yes. So just taking all this so this portfolio that you're building, so for those of you who are moving into academia, and hopefully, you'll get a tenure track position at a university with a tenure system, like we have a tenure track system here. So you are going to continue this portfolio, right? You do your PhD, you've moved from generalist to specialist, but then when you move into your first academic job as a professor in a tenure, then you build it even more, and you're going to build on those experiences by going to more conferences, and then you'll be jumping into publishing or your articles. I know in STEM disciplines, a lot of the labs that you guys do, or some of your professors, that the professor will be the first author or the corresponding author, and then that students will develop into that role. But you'll get your own labs, you will be the corresponding author, and then it shifts, the responsibility shifts, right? So the identity shifts from student to scholar. I mean, you're always a scholar, but from student to responsible, the first party scholar, is really exciting. It's a little daunting, but it's exciting. So here I wanted to, I'm going to zoom in on this. And I couldn't think of a really good way to share this. But I want to read through these bullet points, and I want you to think about the spectrum. So as you're growing your scholarly identity, there are multiple ways or dispositions or characteristics or ways that you can think about where you fall on your scholarly identity, right? And it's a growth mindset, right? So all of these are different areas of growth, and if you were to think of it as a continuum, you won't fall in the same point for all of these dispositions. So, for example, one disposition is you are entering into an ongoing scholarly conversation and not a finished conversation. Like, you might be more over on this, right? You might be more over okay, I've known this for quite a while. I had to learn this a few years into my undergrad, but now I'm feeling very confident on this scale. So if we want seek out conversations taking place in your research areas, as an undergrad, you probably aren't necessarily seeking out too many other conversations outside of your class time, but as a graduate student and new faculty member, going to conferences and finding other sources of information are going to be a big part of your job. So this one just now might be unfolding in your scholarly identity. And if you reflect back on your time as a scholar, it's interesting to see how it all, the arc, right, of your development. And for those of you going into academia and teaching, take this information with you, like when you're dealing with a first-year student straight out of high school. They don't know a lot of these things, so it will ultimately also help you shape how you teach, because your role is going to be how to help your students develop their scholarly identity. And it might mean you need to tell them, by the way, guys, you're entering into a conversation that has been going on for a long time. and it's not finished, and it's not going to be finished for a long time, and that's okay. Some of the other ones, seeing yourself as a contributor to scholarship, not just a consumer. This is a very big one for graduate students, right? So as an undergrad, you might not necessarily feel like first couple of years in undergrad, you'll feel like a consumer. You're just absorbing. And then finally, you get all your ideas to share. Scholarly conversations take place in various venues. Able to suspend judgment on the value of a particular piece. So this is really getting to bias, right? So really being able to separate out not just personal bias, but any like bias coming from the author, bias coming from the resources used, bias coming from the databases used for research, for example, or where it's published, like knowing that there is bias in scholarship and able to recognize it and define it. Entering or understanding the responsibilities that comes into, so this is what I was talking about earlier, when you're going into a faculty status and you're going to have your own lab and you have your students and you're going to be the corresponding author, you're now assuming a lot more responsibility. And that happens over time, right? Your freshman year or first year, first semester, not a whole lot of responsibility. Over time into graduate school and into your first year or so in a professorship, that responsibility grows. Able to value and evaluate contributions made by others critically, not criticize, right? So able to assess and evaluate information, that kind of goes into the bias conversation. Oh, and bias exists in information systems, and developing research fluency empowers you. So bias in research is a big one. You know, what keywords do you use? How do you search? Where do you search? And like other limiters like date range, you know, all those kinds of things. And research fluency really ultimately lift up your scholarly identity, because as a writer and as a presenter at a conference, for example, people are going to be critically analyzing the sources that you use. So your scholarly identity will ultimately be, can you research well? Can you find effective information? Can you find unbiased information and appropriate information to support your arguments? So ultimately that scholarly identity does land in, you know, does fall heavily into the research fluency arena, I should say. So as we're talking about research fluency, this kind of segues into how can you enter the scholarly conversation? How can you preserve an ethical scholarly identity? Because there is a certain standard in academia and in scholarship, and as a scholar, that you need to be able to, share your ideas that are ethical and right? So how do we do this? So here are some of the ways that students, or those of us, scholars who are developing, and I guess we can always say we are always developing our scholarly identity, but how can we do this and learn to do this? So some very basic ways are making sure we cite contributing works, right? So this is a very basic, don't plagiarize. Make sure you're attributing appropriate information to the right people. And this is something that needs to be developed, right? We don't necessarily come into our scholarly identity knowing this, or we might have a little bit of an understanding, but that understanding of why attribution is so important grows over time. So it seems kind of basic, but it's actually a very complex. It's very complex, yeah. So again, how can we ethically contribute? We can contribute when we contribute to the conversation at an appropriate level. So for example, let's take teaching, for example, like say you're teaching an undergraduate class. Well, you're going to be contributing or asking your students to contribute at the right level. We don't want to make it too high, too low. We don't want to We don't want people to, we don't want to we don't want expectations to be mismatched. So some examples are, you want to consider your audience, you want to consider the materials, and you also want to consider what is the appropriate outcome or a product that you're asking people to create. That is also very important. And you could maybe even reflect on some of your own professors here at Western. Do you, not that I'm asking you to evaluate them now, but reflecting on some of the coursework, do you think that some of your coursework or some of it, that what was asked of you, was that at an appropriate level? Chances are yes, because again, we learn this over time. Identify barriers to entering scholarly conversations via various venues. So knowing that not all people have the same or equal access to information when entering, or background coming into the scholarly conversation, and that people are coming in at different points. And it gets complicated in a class. I mean, I'm sure even you as students can witness in your own class with your classmates or lab mates, or if you're a TA, what you're teaching, that so many variations or variables are playing into where people's start points are. So again, critically evaluate contributions. So we've talked about that. Participatory information environments, meaning search engines like Google Scholar, Library Search, etc., or just Google, period. Just thinking about how information reacts or interacts differently in those environments. So knowing that information here, this point is your scholarly identity. Part of that means you understand that information changes over time, and that information changes based on how it's produced, right? So a journal article is going to be very different from a book or some other scholarly product like an infographic or something like that, or video. It's all going to, information is shaped by the medium, right? I don't know if any of you have taken a communications class, but Marshall McLuhan, the message is the medium. So here, the last two summarize the changes in scholarly perspectives over time, right? So information changes over time. So as a scholar, your identity in your output, so if you think about output, your output or your scholarly product and your scholarly identity is going to grow the more you interact with information, because you will have a bigger and greater understanding with how information is influenced by the point in time. Like, so something that happened yesterday versus something that happened 10 years ago, the information that comes out of those two events are very different, right? Only because of time and format, just at the very basic level. But then after a while, it becomes context and reflection and depth and breadth of the topic. And then finally, recognize that a given scholarly work may not represent the only or even the majority perspective on the issue. So this again talks about bias, just understanding the end goal is that as I don't want to say matured, but experienced scholar, your identity has now grown into this more matured scholar that understands that information is not always perfect. And that you are able to assess and evaluate as needed. So in a nutshell, what this section is trying to say is your scholarly identity is inherently linked to, so scholarly identity is linked to your productivity, right? So whatever, and that productivity means how you share and what you share. So what you share is inherently linked to the resources you used. So the research you do, the research methodologies you implement, all of that feeds directly through that link, those links into your scholarly identity. So it's not a checklist of these are the things I need to do to grow my scholarly identity. It's more of you become I don't want to say a portfolio because that's too inhuman, but it's like a collection, right, of time and experience, and you just grow and maturity over time. I would never expect a first semester student to have the same expertise as a fifth semester PhD student who's defending their thesis and ready to graduate in May, for example. Like, those are two very different students. And if you think about the why, you can go through these bullet points here and realize that some of these starting points probably aren't even on the radar of a first year student, right? Like, they have no idea. But over time, a more mature or experienced scholar who has that time and effort put into research can be like, oh yes, this is my trajectory. This is what I did. So finally, how can the libraries support scholars like you? I don't know if you guys watch a lot of PBS, but that sounds like a PBS public broadcasting system, like support from viewers like you. So how can the library support scholars who are developing their scholarly identity? And yes, you are in your graduate courses, so you have, thanks Tracy, so you have a really good idea of where you're going. Well, some of the ways that we can help are we can work with you on a one-on-one basis. So we have research appointments that you can make with so we have subject librarians available for all the academic disciplines, and I'll show you how to connect with those librarians. But we work with graduate students all the time. So for example, for those of you in the sciences, Ed Eckel, and I'll give you the contact information. I'm hoping some of you have met him before. Ed Eckel is the STEM librarian, and he works all the time with graduate students and undergrads on research projects. And those research appointments can last anywhere from a half hour to 2 hours, for example. And you can just I'll show you his calendar and here, I'll just do it right now so making an appointment. And actually, I'm going to start from the library homepage because I want to show you where to find it on the library homepage rather than just sending you the link. So here's the library homepage. And in order to make an appointment with your subject librarian, you're just going to come here and scroll all the way down to connect with the librarian. And here we have by department, by liaison team, or first available. I don't recommend first available only because since you are all in your graduate level program, I highly recommend working with the subject specialist. The subject librarians are all generalists for undergrad, but I would not be comfortable at all working with a PhD student just because I do not have the content knowledge. All of our subject librarians have higher degrees in subject disciplines. So, for example, what were some of the geosciences? So if I come down, so Ed Eckel, so here we have it alphabetized by subject, and then what's so great is see here is appointment with Ed. So I just click on that link, it shows me his calendar, and all I have to do is say, okay, I want to meet next Wednesday at 3 o'clock, and then I continue, and then I just fill out my info, in-person, phone, WebEx, or Zoom, and then I just confirm my appointment. Ed will get the email with all your information, and then he'll just meet you whichever way you choose. It's that simple. It's really great, and I highly, highly recommend it. It is probably one of the best parts of my day is when I get to work with graduate students because it's so fascinating what you guys are doing. All right, and now I'm going to go back to the LibGuide. So that's make an appointment here. That's going to that list of all the librarians. We have virtual chat. So I just wanted to show you here on my screen, see this live chat. Whenever it's green like that, that means there's a librarian available, so 9 to 5 or 11 to 3. And if it's offline, you can just submit a question via email and we'll get to it the next morning. So if it's off, if this is red, don't let that dissuade you. Just submit a question and someone will get to you the next business day. So that's fantastic. So it's going to be me who's answering these questions or one of my colleagues, right? So this is all live Waldo librarians. It's not an automated chat service. And if we can't answer it, we can connect you to somebody who can there, someone else in the libraries. And then also we have the events calendar. So obviously you guys have already found this. So here is, and this is off of the library homepage. I'm going to show you in this screen. So from the library homepage, to get to that event calendar, just scroll all the way down, and then all library events here. And then you can get to those here, and you're good. And finally, I'm going to back up one more time to the LibCal, or to the, whoops, I'm sorry, going the wrong place. And then I also recommend, if you are interested in developing your information literacy, so I talked a lot about scholarly identity and I talked about scholarly conversation. Information literacy, this is really going through the basics of talking about how information changes over time, or how bias infiltrates the search environment or search resources. So if you're interested in learning more about that on your own, I highly recommend this course that we developed here in the libraries, and you can find it in e-learning. It's a class, but it's free, and it's just like you get a certificate of completion at the end. There are about, I think there are 7 modules. You don't need to take them all. It covers citing sources, plagiarism, and stuff like that. So if you're interested, or if you're a TA and you feel like some of your students need a little introductory course, I highly recommend taking a look at this as well. Yeah, so I'm going to stop there. And thank you so much for coming. And I'm going to stop recording, and I'm going to see if any of you have any questions.